Russia is one of the greatest and most powerful powers in world history, whose fate has undergone many changes and catastrophes. Its history began more than 1,000 years ago in the vast expanses of Eastern Europe, along rivers and majestic forests, where some of the first Slavic settlements arose. Great states were formed here, which determined the future of entire nations and nationalities. Russia built empires that stretched from Europe to Asia. Giant cities and armies of millions of people appeared here. The Mongols will take over these lands. Empires were falling, and nations were experiencing crises. Entire dynasties collapsed overnight. What you're about to see is radically different from any historical documentary you've seen before. Using artificial intelligence and based reconstructions, you will embark on a journey through time to witness the full development of Russia from its very first steps to its greatest achievements and tragedies. You will see the most significant moments in the history of Russia, which changed not only its fate, but also the fate of the whole world. Let's start from the beginning. The early Slavs and the formation of Kievan Rus. The history of Russia begins with the creation of the first stable states in the vast expanses of Eastern Europe. In 862, the Vikings arrived in the lands that would later become the core of Russia, the Scandinavian Vikings, known for their trade and military strength. These Varangians, seeking to establish control over trade routes, came to Novgorod and, according to ancient chronicles, founded the Rurik dynasty, marking the beginning of a state entity that would later be known as Kievan Rus. This moment became the starting point for the development of the future great power. During the 9th century, there were many Slavic tribes on the territory of present-day Russia, which trace their history back to the ancient Indo-Europeans. These tribes lived in communities, engaged in agriculture and cattle breeding. But it was only through the unification of these disparate tribes, with the assistance of the Vikings, that for the first time it was possible to create not just an alliance, but a state with a central authority that could effectively manage vast territories. Thus, the Varangians, with their traditions of centralized government, had a key influence on the further development of the country. Under the leadership of Prince Rurik, who was invited in 862 in order to establish order and governance in these lands, the era of unification began. In 864, Rurik, sitting in his fortified center in Novgorod, was able to unite several tribes, which became the basis for the formation of centralized power in the north of Russia. By the middle of the 9th century, Rurik and his descendants began to expand their possessions. One of the most prominent rulers of that time, Prince Oleg, took control of Kiev and annexed it to his state, which was consolidated in 882, when Oleg proclaimed Kiev the capital. This act was an important step towards the creation of Kievan Rus, a state that would play a crucial role in the political, cultural, and economic life of Eastern Europe in the following centuries. Kievan Rus experienced its golden age in the Akshi centuries. During these years, its influence spread far beyond its borders. From the Baltic to the Black Sea, from the Carpathians to the Volga. Special attention was paid to foreign trade, and Kiev became an important trade and cultural center. One of the most significant events of that time was the baptism of Rus in 957. It was an event that became a turning point in the history of the whole of Eastern Europe. The baptism of Princess Olga, and then her son Sviatoslav, brought a new religion to Kievan Rus, a Christianity. Already in 957, during a visit to Constantinople, Olga was baptized, which led to the gradual spread of Christianity among the ruling elite, and later among the people. Of particular importance was the baptism of Prince Vladimir Sviatoslavich in 988, who made Christianity the state religion of Kievan Rus. This event not only led to the development of cultural and religious ties with Byzantium, but also laid the foundation for the formation of the identity of the future Russian nation. Vladimir's religious reform had long-term consequences, influencing all subsequent centuries and forming cultural traditions that have persisted to the present day. At this time, Kievan Rus became a powerful state, embodying Slavic identity. The construction of temples, the strengthening of urban infrastructure, and the development of writing, all these achievements eventually became evidence that Russia was ready to become not only a political force, but also an important cultural center on the map of Europe. However, despite its power, Kievan Rus could not avoid internal conflicts and external threats. After the death of Vladimir the Great in 1015, the state faced strife between his sons, which eventually weakened its unity. Following this, the era of partial disintegration and intervention by neighboring nations began. Conflicts between the principalities, as well as the invasions of nomads and Varangians on Russian lands, became harbingers of future changes. Nevertheless, Traces of that great era remained in the historical memory of the people of Kiev and all of Russia, when the state was the largest in Eastern Europe. And the desire to restore its greatness became one of the decisive motives throughout Russian history. The Mongol invasion and the rise of Moscow. In the 13th century, after Kievan Rus began to disintegrate, a new great test for the Russian lands appeared on the horizon of the Mongol invasion. In 1237, the Tatar-Mongol army, led by Bachu Khan, grandson of the great Genghis Khan, invaded the territory of Russia. For several years, the Mongols destroyed cities and burned settlements, and in 1240 Kiev was destroyed, and its inhabitants were forced to flee or die. The Mongols established a brutal rule that lasted for more than 200 years, called the Horde Yoke, which left an indelible mark on the history of Eastern Europe. But although Kiev was destroyed, with the appearance of the Horde, Moscow began to rise. In 1263, Prince Alexander Nevsky, who had previously defeated the Swedes and Germans in famous battles, established Moscow as an important political and cultural center, thus becoming the basis for future power. However, it was at the end of the 14th century, during the reign of Dmitry Donskoy, that Moscow began to actively resist the Horde. In 1380, during the Battle of Kulikovo, Dmitry Donskoy, Grand Duke of Moscow, inflicted a crushing defeat on the army of Mame, one of the leaders of the Horde. This battle was a turning point, symbolizing the beginning of the liberation of the Russian lands from Tatar-Mongol rule. Despite the fact that the final victory over the Horde did not occur immediately, the Battle of Kulikovo served as the basis for further struggle for independence. In 1480, under the leadership of Ivan Yi, Moscow finally freed itself from the power of the Golden Horde, securing the status of an independent state. Ivan Yi, called Ivan the Great, not only liberated Moscow from the Mongol yoke, but also began the process of centralizing power, striving to create a powerful, centralized state. He declared Moscow the Third Rome, believing that after the fall of Byzantium, Russia would become the heir to the great Orthodox Empire. Ivan I consolidated the territory by annexing new lands and creating a powerful army that made Russia a strong player in the political arena of Eastern Europe. The formation of the Russian Empire and the reign of Peter the Great. At the beginning of the 17th century, Russia experienced the so-called time of troubles, a period of anarchy, political conflicts, and power struggles, when the country was torn apart by internal wars, as well as the invasion of Polish troops. In 1613, after a long struggle, the Romanov dynasty came to power. Mikhail Romanov was elected Tsar, and his reign marked the beginning of a new era for Russia. One of the most significant moments in the history of Russia was the coming to power of Peter I, who would later be called Peter the Great. In 1682, after becoming Tsar, he entered into a struggle with internal forces opposing his reforms. Peter was determined to modernize the country in order to make Russia a powerful European power. In 1703, Peter the Great founded St. Petersburg, a new city that was supposed to be a window to Europe. St. Petersburg symbolized Russia's transformation, striving for modernization, and strengthening contacts with the West. Peter reformed the army and navy, introduced new forms of government, and even changed the calendar, bringing Russia closer to European standards. In 1721, Peter the Great was proclaimed emperor, and Russia became the Russian Empire. The Golden Age of the Russian Empire and the reign of Catherine the Great. After the death of Peter the Great, Russia continued to develop as a great empire. Catherine I, known as Catherine the Great, came to power in 1762 and continued her reform policy. She significantly expanded the empire's territory by annexing Crimea in 1783 and other lands on the Black Sea. Ekaterina also significantly strengthened the role of Russian culture and education by creating academies and theaters, supporting literature and art. However, her reign was also marked by harsh measures to suppress internal uprisings, such as the Pugachev Rebellion and the Cossack Uprising in 1773 to 1775. At the turn of the 18th and 19th centuries, Russia continued to be a strong European power. An important moment in history was Russia's participation in the Napoleonic Wars. In 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte, determined to conquer Europe, attacked Russia. In response, Russian troops under the command of Mikhail Kutuzov inflicted a crushing defeat on the French in the Battle of Borodino, and then pursued them all the way to Paris. Revolutions, the collapse of the Russian Empire, and the creation of the Soviet Union. But the beginning of the 20th century was a time of great trials for the Russian Empire. In 1905, the country experienced the First Russian Revolution, caused by the discontent of peasants, workers, and intellectuals against the autocratic regime of Nicholas II. Despite concessions, such as the creation of the State Duma, revolutionary sentiments only intensified. In 1914, when the First World War began, Russia was drawn into a conflict that was a disaster for the economy and the army. Millions of soldiers died, and the country was on the verge of social and political collapse. In 1917, the February Revolution broke out in Russia, as a result of which Nicholas II abdicated, thus ending more than 300 years of rule by the Romanov dynasty. Power in the country passed to the interim government, but it could not cope with the growing problems such as famine, economic crisis, and participation in the war. This led to a new surge of revolutionary sentiments. In October 1917, the Bolsheviks, under the leadership of Vladimir Lenin, seized power in the country. The October Revolution marked Russia's transition to a socialist state. Lenin and his associates sought to build a new order based on Marxist ideology, and soon the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic (RSFSR) was founded, which would become the core of the Soviet Union. The Civil War and the formation of the Soviet Union. After the revolution, Russia plunged into a civil war that lasted from 1918 to 1922. Two main forces met in the struggle for power. The supporters of the new Bolshevik government are the Red Army and the counter-revolutionary forces called the White Army, supported by foreign powers. The war was brutal and bloody. Millions of people died from fighting, famine, and epidemics. But in the end, thanks to the effective strategy of Lenin and his army, the Bolsheviks won. In December 1922, the Soviet Union was officially established, which united several republics, including Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and Transcaucasia. The Soviet Union became the first socialist state in the world, the basic ideal of which was to build a society based on equality, collective ownership, and socialist principles. Stalin and the industrialization of the Soviet Union. After Lenin's death in 1924, Joseph Stalin entered the political arena and became the new leader of the Soviet Union. Stalin concentrated full power in his hands, gradually destroying the opposition. In 1928, he initiated a policy of industrialization and collectivization aimed at the rapid transformation of the Soviet Union into a powerful industrial power. The massive collectivization of agriculture led to famine in some regions, especially in Ukraine, where millions of people died. Nevertheless, a powerful industry and an army were created in a short time. The Second World War was one of the most tragic and great periods for the Soviet Union. In 1941, Nazi Germany, violating the Non-Aggression Pact, invaded the Soviet Union, launching the Great Patriotic Front. Despite the terrible losses, starting in 1943, the Red Army launched a counteroffensive, and in 1945, Soviet troops entered Berlin, ending the war with victory. Millions of Soviet citizens died, but the Soviet Union demonstrated its might and became one of the two superpowers on the world stage. The Cold War and the Space Race. After World War I, the world was divided into two camps: a capitalist one, led by the United States, and a socialist one, led by the Soviet Union. The two countries became rivals in the so-called Cold War, which lasted from the late 1940s until 1991. The space race has become an important element of this struggle. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched a satellite into space for the first time, and in 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space, which was an incredible achievement for the USSR. In the 1950s and 1960s, despite Stalin's political repression, the USSR experienced a period of thaw under Nikita Khrushchev. The country began to openly discuss important issues, and reforms were carried out in agriculture and industry. However, internal instability and economic problems prevented the successful modernization from continuing. The end of the Soviet Union and the formation of modern Russia. By the end of the 1980s, the Soviet Union was experiencing a serious crisis caused by economic difficulties and internal contradictions. In 1991, after an unsuccessful coup that supporters of the old regime tried to organize, the Soviet Union officially collapsed. On December 26, 1991, the agreement on the creation of the CIS was signed, and Russia became an independent state headed by Boris Yeltsin. After the collapse of the USSR, Russia went through difficult years of economic reforms and political instability. In 2000, Vladimir Putin came to power, who carried out a series of reforms aimed at stabilizing the economy and returning Russia to the international arena as a powerful player. In the 21st century, Russia has once again become an important geopolitical actor, and its economy and military power play a key role in world politics. Modern Russia, from reforms to global influence. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 2000s, Russia faced many economic and social challenges. However, thanks to the reforms carried out by Vladimir Putin, economic growth and stability have been recorded in the country. In the early years of his rule, Putin focused on restoring state control over strategic sectors of the economy, especially the oil and gas sector. This has given Russia important resources for stabilization and growth. The country's economy has gradually begun to recover, which has allowed Russia to launch large-scale infrastructure modernization projects, the construction of new roads, bridges, airports, and railways. Expectations of economic growth began to come true, and in the early 2000s, Russia regained its status as an important economic and political player on the world stage. But serious challenges have also stood in the way of the country. In 2008, the global financial crisis affected Russia, leading to a sharp drop in the ruble and falling oil prices. This period was a test for the Russian authorities, and the government was forced to implement anti-crisis measures to restore the economy. However, thanks to the accumulated reserves and rapid response, the country was able to overcome the crisis. Russia in the global political games. The events of 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea, which led to an international crisis and the imposition of sanctions against Russia, became a key moment in the political arena in the modern history of Russia. These events not only marked a turning point in relations with Western countries, but also radically changed the political and economic picture of the region. For Russia, it was an act of restoring historical justice, as many in the country claimed, but it provoked widespread criticism and sanctions in the international arena. In response to sanctions and international isolation, Russia has stepped up its efforts to strengthen its foreign policy and ties with other countries such as China, India, and the BRICS countries. Over the following years, Russia actively increased its influence in international politics, participating in conflict resolution, such as the Syrian conflict, and continuing to play an important role in the United Nations and other international institutions. Russia and its place in the 21st century. In recent years, Russia has continued to strengthen its position on the world stage, both economically and politically. Russia's industrial giants, such as Rosneft, Gazprom, and others continue to play a key role in the global energy sector. But the country is also actively developing high-tech, startups, and other innovative industries. Russia has repeatedly stated its ambitions to become one of the leaders in the field of artificial intelligence, robotics, and space research. One of the symbols of Russia's technological ambitions is its space program. Since the 2010s, Russia has continued to develop its space technology, participate in international projects such as the International Space Station, and take steps to explore the Moon and Mars. The development of new satellites and space-related technologies continues, providing the country with a strategic advantage in the future. Conclusion: Russia is in the future. Despite all the trials, Russia continues to be one of the leading countries in the world. From its ancient Slavic roots, through the creation of a powerful empire and the Soviet Union, to a modern power, Russia has come a long and difficult way. This path has not always been direct and painless, but it has become part of the great and tragic history of the country, which continues to develop and influence the whole world. What will be the future of Russia? What steps will she take in the field of economics, politics, and technology? Time will tell, but one thing is for sure. Despite all the difficulties, Russia not only preserves its unique traditions and culture, but also actively builds a new future, becoming an increasingly important part of the global community.